Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and that means Friday Reads, where we all take a gauge of where we are reading-wise, what we read recently, what we're currently reading, what we're going to be reading in the near future. I love these kinds of videos, and I want to make one today. I want to show you some of the recent books on my radar, past or yet to come. We'll start off with Ed Owens. I just got a finished copy of this thing in the mail the other day. This is after Elizabeth. Can the Monarchy Save Itself? This wasn't good. it was thin. It suffered from all of the faults that I always describe. I think we also saw another recent monarchy book. It suffers from all of those faults. It's gossipy. It's authoritative without any authority. It's going off newspaper reports and fan fiction in the mind of the author. The author says that the monarchy needs to reinvent itself, and gives a number of ways why that's necessary and how that could happen, and it ends up being just the fairly thin speculation of one royalty watcher. Well, I could deliver 150 pages of thin speculation as a royalty watcher myself. I don't need to read somebody else's. So I keep looking. I keep at the subject of the House of Windsor. I think it's fascinating, and I keep looking for intelligent commentary on it. And some of you who are familiar with them as punchlines will think that's a contradiction in terms. But actually, no, there is intelligent commentary, and it's great when you find it. But this was not it. There is a book on the House of Windsor that I think is coming out next year. Fairly big. It has all the earmarks ahead of time, all the presentiments of being exactly the kind of stuff I want. But this was not that. So let's move on here. This next thing was a big slipcase box set of the complete Norse Mythology of Neil Gaiman. Not his book by that name, but the comic book adaptation of the myths and legends of the ancient Norse, as drawn by the great comic book artist P. Craig Russell. Gaiman and Russell, I think, have developed a kind of working chemistry. Certainly this material brings out the best in P. Craig Russell's artwork. I've made it clear on this channel I'm not a big fan of Neil Gaiman's prose, his writing, even his thinking, his narrative thinking, the way he thinks of stories. None of it really appeals to me. But I love P. Craig Russell's artwork, and I always have. I've loved it for decades and decades now. He must be pushing 70 by now. And it's never better than in this. This is a rare instance where I really doubt that I would want this artwork in digital form. It'd be more convenient, certainly, than a big, heavy box set. But just delightful. If you're a fan of Norse mythology, you're going to want this whether you're a fan of Neil Gaiman or not. Although, I think it's probably pricey. It's probably a holiday event that's probably pricey. And then we have a romance novel by Carolyn Lee. I believe this is the third in a series of her Surprise Dukes series. It's a Regency romance, a modern Regency romance. I think the only thing I've read by this author has been the previous book in the series. I don't think I ever read the first book in the series. This is called The Duke's Wicked Widow. And here you know that it's a modern Regency romance because not only is he naked, and not only are they in mid-coitus, but he has a tattoo. So you're racking up the anachronisms on the cover alone. These things are not meant to be dutifully accurate to the time period. They're just meant to be basically costume romps in the nature of Bridgerton. And this one I thought was really interesting. It didn't strike me as at all the same as the one before it. I guess maybe that's a strength of the author. Our main character loses all of the male title holders in her family virtually at the same time. And she's going to get chewed up and spat out by the legal attainder process if she isn't involved in the family directly. So another way that you can tell that this is not a traditional Regency is that she needs to get knocked up. She needs to be carrying her dead husband's heir. That will make the inheritance so much better. It will work out. She and her stepdaughter have nothing if they don't have that. They would be out on the street. And believe it or not, that is the plot engine at the beginning of this book, is that she needs to find a man to impregnate her. And she picks a man who is the last person on earth you would ever expect a heroine to pick. I mean, it's not like she has a whole lot of options, but he's has the blackest name in society. It seems like just you're asking to add problems to your life rather than solve the one problem you need solved if you do this. And naturally, if you read romance novels, you know she falls in love with him, and he falls in love with her. They fall in love with each other at different speeds and in very different ways. That also was intriguing. I found this very intriguing. I do not remember. I think I've read one book by this author before this. I think it was the previous book in this series, and I do not remember it stopping me the way this book did. I kept thinking about this book and think, oh, okay, so you're going to do that. I don't usually see authors do that in this subgenre. So it was enjoyable, very enjoyable. I'm going to have to check and see my romance bookshelf is triple stacked mass market paperbacks. So it is the work of a lifetime to go looking for one book on that bookcase. I keep meaning to find a new home for them that maybe is more spread out, but I don't know that I visit them enough to warrant that when space is at a premium because of all the printed books that I have. The space should not be at a premium. I should instead be getting rid of printed books. Maybe I'll go through that romance bookcase and see what doesn't need to stay. Oh, this next one's a romance as well. This is contemporary. This is The Fearless One by Laurie Foster, who I believe that Sarah at the Bookish Knitter, she's our romance queen here on BookTube, I believe she likes Laurie Foster more than I do. It was largely through Sarah and a couple of other channels, but mainly Sarah, that have nudged me out of my Regency comfort zone to read contemporary stuff. And this is it's the story that centers around a young woman who wants more than anything, wants only to find out what happened to her family, the tragedy of her family, the tragedy that haunts her whole life. She has gone down into the weeds to search for the reasons behind that. I don't want to spoil the plot, but when she's searching for those roots, she comes across the main character here, the male main character, the male lead, as Sarah always puts it, this is a family drama. I don't remember what book this is in the series. This is easily standalone. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. And I don't know, am I such a floozy for costumes? This is almost, in some ways, in two ways at least, especially the different ways that the two characters fall in love with each other and the different speeds at which that happens. In those two ways at least, this is a very similar novel to The Duke's Wicked Widow. And yet, it didn't work as well on me. I'm going to have to compare notes, look at my reading journal, maybe ask Sarah what it is about this author. Because I know that this is the fourth or fifth novel that I've read by her, and they all just leave me thinking, all right, well, that was competently done, certainly. There are three plots in motion here. They're all effectively in motion. I don't know if you're familiar with, for instance, genre fiction. Often a writer will put three plots in motion, and that's two plots more than they can comfortably handle, and they just forget about one of them. And you, the reader, are of course not going to do that. So you're waiting around for them to remember such and such. I hate it when that happens. It happens all too often. I read a novel just last night, a post-apocalyptic novel. The opening scene is the main character, a young man, taking careful aim with his rifle. He has very little ammunition. There aren't many working rifles left in the world. He's starving. It's cold. It's almost nightfall. He's taking careful aim at a doe who is peacefully grazing with her fawn. At one point, he rustles the leaves, and the fawn looks up. And he's trying to mentally will it. Don't alarm. There's nothing. I'm going to be quiet now. I'm trying to take my shot. Don't alarm your mother. And I'm reading the book, I'm reading this opening chapter, and I'm thinking, all right, well, first of all, you're going to lose all of your readers if you have your main character kill that doe. Obviously, something else should happen. Some action should intervene. But no, he shoots the doe dead. He's desperate for food. He needs the meat. And so he takes the doe back to his bunker, and they've got rations, and he dresses the doe and whatnot. And I was reading page after page after page of this opening chapter of this book, thinking the one question that you're now thinking, that anyone reading that would think: what about the fawn? Author completely forgets. Doesn't even think to mention what happens to what the obvious question that anyone's going to ask when they read that scene. Nothing like that happens in this book. This is professionally done. It just not at any point moved me. And you would think with the massive tragedy hanging over the head of the heroine that it would, and it didn't. And, you know, it reminded me that I don't think I've ever read anything by Laurie Foster that did that. So I need to find out, you know, am I doing something wrong, or do other romance readers not find her quite the thing? This next one was a reread. I recently reread Serious Noticing by James Wood for Nonfiction November. And this is not for Nonfiction November. It could be, but I'm running out of time today. I did a live stream with Mark from Book Time with Elvis and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. We did a really fun live stream about espionage fiction. But unfortunately, that cut into a day that was already low on time. So I'm going to have to just stop at 2 videos today and not do a Nonfiction November. But this wouldn't, I don't know that this would be a Nonfiction November pick anyway, because I immediately went from Serious Noticing to another James Wood book. I immediately reread another James Wood book, The Fun Stuff. And I like this a lot more. This struck me as a lot less chin stroking, a lot less whisker fluffing, a lot more energetic, up to your elbows reading of stuff. That's all this is. It's just a collection of literary essays. Literary essays are the types that you would write for the New Yorker. So you get 2,000 words, and you can write about, if you're James Wood, you can write about anything you please. And it will, you will capture all of your associations. So if you're writing about Goncharov, if you're writing about Oblomov, that book up there, if you're writing about Oblomov, if it reminds you of something else, some aspect, it doesn't have to be a Russian novel. It could be some other book that features sleepy characters or feckless characters. Maybe you bring in Bertie Wooster. If you're writing a long, meandering, self-consciously literary piece for the New Yorker, well, you can do that. And oftentimes, as I think I made clear in my Serious Noticing video, oftentimes that strikes me as forced. And maybe a little condescending, although I've never caught any condescension in James Wood. I don't think he himself is condescending. And so it doesn't show in his writing. It's just, it always strikes me as, you know, what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to recommend books to people, or are you trying to impress people? And I didn't get any of that in this book. Just none at all. I didn't read it as an ebook. I have the print copy up on my Books About Books shelf. So that was a reread, and it really, it was kind of good for me, because I had kind of a negative feeling from reading Serious Noticing, and that's gone now. I'm back on James Woods' side. I'm sure that it's a great relief to him. Then we have something by Charlotte Bryce. It's a Christmas book. It's got that warm, cozy feel of a Christmas book. Maybe. Maybe it's got too many warm, cozy feels of a Christmas book. It's a novella. It's tentacle fiction. It's Kraken Claws, in which a whole bunch of mermaids, and maybe a few mermen, are getting uppity. They're getting feisty. They need to be put back in line. And it's possible that a big, domineering kraken with tentacles to spare will be the one to do it. You may remember in last Friday Reads, I also mentioned tentacle fiction. And the tentacle fiction that I read last time was considerably more energetic than this one. This one was a little bit more on the fun side. I think it's probably a contradiction in terms to call any tentacle fiction cozy. I think that's probably impossible. But this is about as close as you could get. I don't know that I would call it a recommend. I'm never sure what to do about recommending tentacle fiction. But I always read it. There's a ton of it in December. Then I went back to this. I have this a picture on the iPad, but I went back to the physical trade paperback of the complete novels of Nancy Mitford. And this time I reread Wigs on the Green, which is her send-up of British fascists. A very pointed subject, given that the two of her sisters were directly enamored of fascists. Unity Mitford takes it on the chin in this book. Oh my God. Diana gets it pretty bad too, but Unity Mitford, oh my. This would have been a relationship-ending novel for any of the Mitford sisters who read it and were involved in it. I just don't know if that they were ever that type of family. I don't think they took writing all that seriously, although Nancy Mitford is fantastic at it. I thought Wigs on the Green was hilarious. It was 10 times funnier than I remembered it being. So this trade paperback really is, I have an ebook of all of Nancy Mitford's books, but this trade paperback is really earning its keep. Because I have not had a bad reading experience. I know that I won't, But I was kind of expecting that maybe these lesser-known Nancy Mitford novels would creak a little. Maybe Love in a Cold Climate, that something like that is stood the test of time. I was kind of thinking maybe these second-tier novels wouldn't, but no, there's nothing second-tier about them. They're amazing. And they don't creak at all. And that, reading Wigs on the Green, led me to another reread, The Mitford Murders by Jessica Fellowes. This is the first book in her Improbable series in which the Mitford sisters are drafted as kind of assistants to a sleuth. They aren't particularly good as murder mysteries. None of them are. The last in the series is probably the closest one that you get to something that would satisfy an actual connoisseur of murder mystery fiction. But as historical novels, oh my, they sparkle. Jessica Fellowes has such an ear for good dialogue, and you need that with the Mitfords. You really do. And with all of the bright young things around them, you really need that. Doing these kinds of books without that, they'd fall flat, and they don't. I remember being completely charmed by this years ago when it came out. I reread it, and I'm completely charmed all over again. I may reread this whole series. I don't know. I think that'd be a large waste of time. What a way to waste time. And then the next one is also a reread. Haven't read it in a good 2 decades. And boy, oh boy, it stopped me in my tracks a number of times. Those of you who may know, I mentioned just earlier in this video that I'm part of a new BookTube event, Dr. November, where Mark at Book Time with Elvis put it together. It's celebrating espionage fiction, secret agent fiction, that sort of thing. And it's been delightful fun. We gathered a bunch of co-hosts. We had a live stream today. We're going to have a few more live streams if we manage to make it happen in November. And our group read for Dr. November is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John le Carré. A real architectural, a load-bearing spy novel of the modern era. And I read The Spy Who Came In From the Cold a few times. I reread it as soon as Dr. November was announced. And then I read it again. I'm now working my way through a lot of Le Carré. I didn't see that coming, but this is turning out to be almost a systematic reread of this author. And just recently, I reread The Naive and Sentimental Lover by Le Carré, which is downright strange. It is. I mean, the more I'm rereading him, the more I'm noticing the strangeness anyway, even of the stuff that I really know. But this... I know this is going to be very heretical. I'm not even 100% sure of it. Forever and ever, if you'd asked me what is Le Carré's best book, I would have said The Perfect Spy. It's big. It's incredibly complicated. It's incredibly lushly imagined. But now I think it might be this. And oddly, it would be him straying from the métier that paid his mortgage in 2 different houses. It would be straying into the strange hinterlands of caustic suburban love. Whatever this is, I'm going to need to reread this as well. I just finished it, and it was like reading it for the first time. All the stuff that's going on in this book, so many moving wheels and gears. And I'm going to have to read it again. I think obviously I'm going to postpone another reread of this book until next year, or until December at least, because I want to read the far more espionage-centric Le Carré for November. For Dr. November. But I'm going to be doing a lot of rereading in the first 2 weeks of December, so might be a time to do that. One point about Le Carré that Greg brought up on our live stream today was how infinitely he invites rereading. He really does. He has thought these books out 16 different angles before you even get to page 1. And he doesn't spoon-feed you anything. So you really do benefit. I'm not saying that you won't enjoy the book the first time. There are plenty of people who love Le Carré have only read it once. You would definitely enjoy, for instance, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold if you've only read it once. But oh boy, do you get more out of him if you reread him. There were tons I missed 20, 30 years ago when I read this the first time. So I was very happy for that reread. Then this next one was also a reread. I read this a long time ago. No idea what put it on my radar, what caused me to pull it down off the shelf. This is Oldest Rose, and this is an absolutely indispensable reference work that actually reads fairly well. It actually reads enjoyably. This is his book on the North American porcupine. that's all. It is not natural history. This is not your normal natural history where, oh, I remember the first time I strode through the Canadian Rockies or anything like that. This is just a textbook on the porcupine. It's natural history. It's evolution. It's biology. It's behavior. It's ethology. It's just a thorough study of the North American porcupine, which is an animal that I know quite well. I've encountered these animals quite often. I've encountered porcupines more in North America than even in Africa. I've encountered North American porcupines quite a bit. And there's a good reason for that, because they are essentially fearless, as you could guess. They are essentially fearless. They are invulnerable to harm. For most predators, they are invulnerable to harm. And they know it. So I've lost track of how many camps I've had where porcupine just waddled in to find out what was going on. And I made sure to keep my dogs away from, don't go anywhere near that animal. That is an absolutely strict order. Don't go anywhere near it. You can make all the noise you want, but I'm not going to spend the next 12 hours pulling quills out of your nose. No way. No way. So I saw that happen plenty of times. The porcupines didn't care about the noise. They didn't care that they were surrounded by baying beagles. They didn't care about that at all. They know they're invulnerable. One porcupine waddled into one of my camps once, crawled into my footlocker, which foolishly I'd left open, and ate one of my books. Without so much as a by your leave, I was just sitting there saying, I hope you're enjoying that. It is remarkable how enjoyable Rose's book is. I just don't have any idea why I pulled it down off the shelf. Then this next book is by, his name is a little blurred. I think it's Jason Staples. This is a very rare category of book for me. In 2023, I've read almost no 2024 books. I haven't been strongly tempted. In this case, I read this author's previous book, which I believe was his debut, and I thought it was truly remarkable biblical exegesis and biblical history. It stuck with me. It really did. It was a serious work along those lines. So when I got his next book, I read it, even though it's, I think, a January release. This is Paul and the Resurrection of Israel. And it's a study of, Pauline theology, which is a pretty brambly subject to start with. This is not, I don't think, for the beginner. I don't think the author would object if I said, you should be familiar with Pauline theology before you read this. You should also probably be familiar with Jewish history, especially exilic history, especially the period of exile. You should know Acts and epistles backwards and forwards. This is a really engaging author on this subject, but this is serious theology. This is serious theological study, and I loved it. Loved it. I thought it was even better than his first book. So come next year, I will certainly be recommending this. If I'm still in the recommending game, if I'm still here, I will certainly be recommending it. But I had to put it on Friday Reads because it was a standout read for the week. Then this next one, also a reread. I haven't read this in probably 50 years, whenever it first came out. This is Duncan McGreary. Don't think that name will be known to you. This is a fantasy novel called Star Axe. I originally saw this at Tro's dry goods store on a spinner rack. I can't imagine what attracted me to the cover, but I found a very competently done fantasy novel. It's fairly standard in a lot of ways. It's not meaning to reinvent the genre. It's a young man who is dedicated his life to peace, but he is, unbeknownst to him, not so much a chosen one, but definitely aligned with a mystical weapon that only exists to kill people. And he goes on a quest. It's a fairly standard quest. He takes his lady love and also a big warrior friend of his, and they have adventures. I don't know if Star Axe was ever continued. I don't get rereading it. For some reason, I have the original paperback that I got at that dry goods store, and it held up. It is still in pretty good shape. I'd love to find a second paperback of this. That would be. I don't think Duncan McGreary exists as an ebook, but I got when I read this 50 years ago, I thought, that's wide open for other books, and I thought the same thing this time too. I don't know if other books have been written. I have no idea if this author's. I'm assuming he's dead, long dead. I have no idea what else he wrote, but I was looking at my bookshelves, and this grabbed my rereading itch. Then this thing I got. This is a big. It's a photo book. It's high definition photography. It doesn't have much in the way of anything else. It's meant to be just a visual experience, a purely visual experience. I don't usually go in for books like that very much because you go through them in 2 seconds and then you're done. It's very seldom that the visuals are arresting enough so that, you know, I'm going to want to keep it or go back to it. I doubt that's true here. This is Richard Kraken is the photographer. Really good, really sensitive photographer. Definitely knows the shot he wants, and that is not always the conventional shot. And this is called The Three of Us, where he takes 3 beautiful young models, men, and takes their clothes off, brings them to a bunch of exotic locations, a cabin, you know, forestry, that sort of thing, takes their clothes off and just has them pose. And he's really good at what a lot of professional photographers try to be good at. Bruce Weber, I think, is the foremost one who tries to be good at it and isn't as good as he thinks he is. He's really good at creating stories with his photos, so that you look at the photo and you automatically start imagining a story. You can see that even on the photo on the cover here. But it happens many times in this book. I was going to say I don't really know the audience for this book, but I do. I think I know who would want this, and I think I know why they'd want it, and that seems like just a huge waste of money and space. but this is the sort of thing that turns up on the top floor of the Strand in New York City. The top floor of the Strand has just floor-to-ceiling shelf after floor-to-ceiling shelf of old prestige coffee table photo books like this. It's a creepy place to visit. It's big and open, but the floor is creaking ominously all the time. There must be 200 tons of weight on that floor. But it must be up to code. I'm sure that the Strand has had that floor examined 1,000,000 times, but it creaks loudly all the time. I'm always using the heebie-jeebies when I'm up there, but this is the sort of thing I would find there for $30. I have no idea how much this original costs, but again, it can't really be a recommend because there's just not enough to it. I mean, it's visually entertaining. It is a visually elegant book, but you're done with it, so to speak, in 15 seconds, and then what? Then we have an old-style Signet Regency romance. This is not a new style. No one here is tattooed. This is by Charlotte Louise Dolan. I think I have 2 of hers, and this is 3 Lords for Lady Anna. Totally sweet. No one loses any kind of clothing in the course of this book. All that happens after the last page. But the plot is very similar to The Duke's Wicked Widow, in that the main character is going to lose everything and is totally vulnerable to one element of The Duke's Wicked Widow that I didn't mention is that there's a bad guy. There's very much a bad guy in this book. And there's a bad guy in this book, too. Wants to ruin our heroine. She takes a job, you know, as a governess and falls in love with the father of the children. That, of course, is very normal. But she is caught in the course of the book. She is caught between three different lords. One is purely evil. One is obviously going to end up being the happily ever after husband. And then there's the third, who is in many ways similar to the main character, in the main male lead in The Duke's Wicked Widow. So it was a wonderful compliment. I don't think I picked this intentionally to compliment that, but it was weird to read them. It's weird to think of them in a Friday Reads back to back, so to speak, with each other, because this is a perfect example, or rather that is a perfect example of how you update this to the new kind of Regency. And the plot largely works in both cases. I am not a prude. I don't so much care that you're adding all sorts of hanky-panky and ripping clothes off. I don't so much care as long as the story is well done. And in both cases it was. Just a few more and then we'll be done. I mentioned Dr. November. I reread Naive and Sentimental Lover for Dr. November, even though it's not really for Dr. November. It's not really espionage. But this, I reread this as well, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, which is not only espionage, but I would argue the quintessential espionage novel of the modern era. And again, Le Carré is surprising me. He is surprising me in every book. I am realizing things, seeing things that I did not get. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, I read when it first came out. And then I reread it when it was a hit TV series. And I am finding all sorts of new things. I think the number one thing I'm learning about Le Carré is that he is an infinitely rereadable author. He will always present you with something new. That's wonderful. It's a wonderful discovery to make. But I'll be talking more about Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy for Dr. November. And then finally we'll end up with, I've already recommended this book. This is Christian Wyman. This is his new book. Zero at the Bone, 50 Entries Against Despair. Very episodic book, very much a COVID book, very much the world is going to hell and I am coming up with reasons not to despair, which sounds very hokey. I've read a number of those kinds of books. I've reviewed probably 50 self-published books along those lines. This author, I swear, as a prosmith, good Lord, he can do no wrong. It's a hackneyed premise. It's even, you might say, some of the entries themselves are hackneyed. But you've just never read prose this beautifully done. In the modern era, you've just never done that. It's just, I loved it. I loved it the first time. I read it again for this Friday Reads and loved it the second time. When I get the finished copy, I'm going to read it a third time. I thought it was tremendous. And it actually is uplifting. I know that sounds so hokey, but it actually is. I strongly recommend. It's a totally sui generis book, as are many of this author's books. So I don't know what to compare it to, but I strongly recommend it. I find it hard. I'm having a hard time picturing a reader who would not find something amazing in this. So there you go. That is a Friday Reads for you on this very harried, very hurried Friday. I'm going to try and get these videos up before you're all in bed, but if not, I can always upload them tomorrow. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.